Welcome back to Bad Marriages in the Bible. I'm Kate.
I'm Sean.
We are so glad to have you back with us. We run Dandelion Ministries, which is dedicated to sharing the grace of Jesus Christ in your place of need. We love to do that through creative means, this podcast, blogs, using art and music, hosting retreats. So this is one of those creative means.
It is.
And specifically, we are looking at the bad marriages in the Bible. We had someone tell us that this podcast could be a lot shorter if we focused on the good marriages in the Bible.
That's right. Yes, very short.
Yes, but the Bible happens to be filled with people who have relationship issues and seem to fall into repeated patterns of dysfunction and turn to self-destructive ways to cope. And so this ancient Hebrew text actually rings very contemporarily true.
That's right, because it is just full of regular people doing their regular people things, which we always turn to things that actually end up compounding problems, I think, when we're left to ourselves. It doesn't end up solving the problem usually.
Yes.
And I think our natural tendency is to repeat what we've heard from the very beginning in this podcast with Adam and Eve, just to repeat the pattern of blame and isolation and running and hiding and fear, essentially, as opposed to, openness, forgiveness, vulnerability, all of those types of things. We don't do those things naturally.
And honestly, you cannot face how wicked we can be to each other if you don't have a stronger hope helping you to face it. To face the wickedness that we can do, the worst that we can do to each other, would be utter despair. So many artists have ended in suicide, looking at the truth of our brokenness, of the worst we can do. Well, you may not have experienced the worst you can do yet.
Hopefully, by God's mercy, you have not.
That's right. But if there was the right concoction of stressors, of hungry, angry, lonely, tiredness, of upbringing, of poverty, of whatever, then we all have that potential of showing the worst we can do. And the honest ones among us know that. And
sure. I mean, it's just, we might all say, well, I never would, but when you just take an honest inventory of your inner world, either your inner monologue or the knee-jerk reactions you have internally against others, then you'll probably see that we can be pretty dark. And especially if you take into account Jesus' teaching on what goodness and holiness actually is when he's preaching in his Sermon on the Mount. He makes it all about your internal world. And we always want to keep it external. We always want to make it, I never crossed that line. I've never actually committed adultery, or I've never killed anybody. That's one that people love to say. I'm not perfect, but I've never killed anybody, kind of thing. But then, you hear Jesus take those external demands and commands from the Old Testament law, and he makes them all about your internal heart situation. And he says, have you ever called anybody a fool? Then you've basically committed murder in your heart. Or have you ever lusted after anybody else?
Looked at them
and thought they look good.
It's the same as adultery.
It's the same as committing adultery. This is you might think that's completely unreasonable, but that's the whole point of holiness. Holiness is actual perfection. It's true love. It's real love all the time. Right. It's not just when you're on your best days or what you kind of do in public. It's actually truly good, and you don't have any of these ulterior motives or feelings and conflict and selfishness, all that kind of stuff. And that is how the law works. I mean, it's why God gives the law, is to actually not to give us an instruction manual to obey and try to keep, but rather to show that we can't actually do it. and that we are not holy, and that we need something far more dramatic than to have our behavior modified.
Yes.
We need to
to try harder to love somebody.
Yeah.
You need a new heart.
Yeah, we need to be saved. We need to be brought to new life. And that's why Jesus comes, and that's the word of the gospel. It is the second word from God. It's a different one from the law.
A better one.
It doesn't bring condemnation or accusation. It brings mercy and pardon and grace and
new life.
Yeah, and his perfect love. Instead of our attempts to try to love and failing at it, which is what all of this podcast is about, our bad marriages and bad relationships.
And so these stories function as a mirror. They are a mirror as we read about Joseph and his brothers and the deep tear of distrust, of lies, of dysfunction, of not caring at all about the other person in your family, about wishing the worst for them. This family has a deep scar in it, and they have tried to hide it under the rug for 16 years. Or longer, actually, by the time Joseph meets his brothers again. And we are going to settle into Genesis chapter 42, and hopefully we'll get through 43, even perhaps into 44. We'll see.
We'll see.
But this is a mirror of the worst we can do. This is jealous brothers from another mother from Joseph. Jacob, had 2 wives, and Rachel was his favorite, and he had Joseph and eventually Benjamin from Rachel, and then he had 10 other sons through Leah, and then there were some concubines in there too. So and so the 10 other brothers were incredibly jealous of Joseph, and he wasn't very wise about it either growing up. But at 16, when he was 17 years old, rather, they threw him into a pit with the intention to kill him, but then changed their minds and sold him into slavery, and he was taken to Egypt.
Right. Yeah. If you've ever seen the movie Minority Report with Tom Cruise, which is a fantastic movie. Kate does not like it at all because she's not into sci-fi type things, but it's a movie about him being a cop, essentially, that they have these precogs, they call them, these people that are able to see kind of the future, and they can see crimes, essentially. And so then they build this whole justice system off of intent, which is, it is what we're talking about, law, and how the law exposes our heart's intent. And they do distinguish between, or they try to distinguish a little bit between a crime of passion and a premeditated crime. But when it comes down to it, it doesn't matter. If you have that just knee-jerk reaction, which is what I think, this had been building, as we've said before, between Joseph and his brothers. His brothers were full of resentment, but they were, kind of restraining themselves, it seems, until that fateful day when Joseph kind of comes and wearing his coat of many colors, comes out alone to them, and they boil over, and it becomes a crime of passion, and they throw him in a pit, and but it's still the same deal. I mean, like this, whether it's premeditated or not, that your heart is broken, and when you're pushed, like Kate said earlier, that we can do things that we never would have thought we'd do. Yeah. And they certainly did. And so what we're going to see is kind of how God, through Joseph, kind of brings them face to face with what they've actually done, and we see kind of their own self-awareness as we walk through this. Yeah, that's right. So we're going to settle into Genesis chapter 42, and God, this whole story is showing how God is in control, how He is what we call sovereign. He is the one overseeing all of the things and all of the actions in our world. He's allowing it, and we wrestle with Him when He's allowing the
the sadness or the hard things or the painful things, the death to happen. Yet that's also a deeper good news because he can redeem any of it and he can uphold and help you through no matter what suffering he does allow.
That's right. This is the reality that God is God. He actually is God. One of our professors, pastoral professors, who we love dearly, who's gone to be with the Lord, Martha Giltnan, had us right. I forget how many times.
Yeah, like 100 times.
100 times at least. That there is a God and I am not him. And that's true. There is a God and he is God. And
I think I had to write, there is a Savior and I'm not him.
That's probably what it is. What it was. Obviously, the exercise worked. But anyway, but it's just the reality that if God is God, the idea that somehow God is not powerful enough and in control over everything in the world is a pretty weak God and not one that I actually want to believe in. I want a God that actually is over everything and that actually has the power to save us. And that's what this really is all about, is he gives a promise to redeem all things, like you said. I think it's one of our false kind of settings in our brains, and part of our sin, I think, is that we think that we come into this world somehow in a neutral position, that there's somehow, that bad things happen to us, and then that kind of means that we become bad or whatever. But the reality is, and that then sounds worse, that God allows bad things to happen. We have that kind of question, why does God let bad things happen to good people? It's like, well, that is not actually real. He doesn't let bad things happen to good people. He allows bad people to do bad things and redeems them. Because that's the reality, is we are not born neutral. We're actually born into brokenness, into sin, as Paul would say. And so the fact that he has mercy on anybody and loves any of us and saves any of us is the dramatic injustice of the gospel, that God actually has mercy on us. And so
the worst thing God could do would be to not intervene, because we'll just destroy each other.
Yeah, when we're left to ourselves, this is what we do. War, jealousy, strife, we do what we've been looking at in the Bible here.
That's right. That's right. And so when you think about it that way, is that we are bent, we are already bent. We don't start neutral or good, like you say. We start bent towards selfishness, towards evil, towards our own pride. That's how we begin. We begin bent that way. And so any time we have experienced forgiveness or met, and we're also bent thinking God doesn't exist or care about us. Like that's what we all believe. And it takes an intervention by God to open our eyes, to believe that he loves us, to believe that he sees us, to believe that he's real. And most importantly, that he is merciful to us and that he wants to forgive, and that he has come to forgive and to love us in our worst spot and make something beautiful come out of our ugliness.
That's right.
And so that is the hope when we're in the midst of suffering and we are wrestling with God's sovereignty and how could he allow this, is that he has come himself and suffered the most for us in Jesus Christ. So he is the anchor when you're in suffering. So in this case, in Genesis 42, God has allowed a famine. Joseph and his brothers would probably have never met again. It's not like his brothers were like, you know what, we feel so guilty, we need to make things right with Joseph. They figure he's probably dead somewhere. Right. Let's just keep lying to our dad. We'll keep that story going that a wild animal tore him to pieces. And they have seen Jacob be devastated by this truth and sort of never get over his grief. But they weren't going to go try to make peace with Joseph. And Joseph was running Egypt. He had now become number 2 to Pharaoh. He had a wife. He had 2 sons. He was, the ruler of a kingdom. And so they would not have seen each other unless God had sent a famine and made them have to confront each other again.
right? Which we knew he was going to do because of the dreams he gave to Pharaoh in the first place, right? And that was this was not an accident, not a mistake. God was actually in control of this. He warned Pharaoh so that Joseph might become his number two, and he might be the one who stores up all this grain to actually to save Egypt and all of the surrounding lands, right?
Yes.
So, yeah.
And so this whole story is really a picture of reconciliation. And we see that it is God who's having mercy on Joseph's brothers and on Joseph. He's already given Joseph the grace to forgive his brothers. We'll see that in chapter 44. But he is also moving in mercy and in love to these brothers who are stuck in their guilt.
Right. And we see the fact that Jacob suspects, frankly, also that they're not telling him the truth because they want to go down to Egypt because they heard that there was grain in Egypt. And so he tells them to go down, his sons, but he does not let them take Benjamin because he does not trust them. He doesn't want anything bad to happen to Benjamin. Benjamin, if you remember, was Joseph's actual blood brother, and the youngest of them all. And so Jacob suspects that his older sons, at the very least, were incredibly neglectful to let their brother get killed when there's 10 of them. I mean, that is something to think about. There's 10 of you, and an animal was able to get Joseph somehow.
Yeah.
You guys couldn't stop this animal,
Right.
So he doesn't let them take Benjamin.
That's 42 verse
the beginning
4.
of 42.
For fear that harm might come to Benjamin.
Right. And so the others go down then to Egypt. And they encounter Joseph, which Joseph is the one who's actually selling all the grain to everybody as governor of the land. And they came and they bow with their faces to the ground before him, which is the beginning of the fulfillment of Joseph's dreams from way long ago, if you remember correctly. The things they hated him for so much. And
Joseph remembers his dreams.
Yeah.
He's like, oh my, this is all starting to happen now.
Right. And Joseph recognizes them, but they don't recognize him. Partly, I'm sure Joseph was probably dressed in Egyptian attire, probably had his hair cut like Egyptians, clean shaven, all that kind of stuff.
The eye makeup.
Eye makeup, maybe, perhaps. Whatever stereotypical picture you have of an Egyptian, he probably looked like that guy. And he was speaking another language. There was an interpreter between them. So they didn't recognize Joseph, but Joseph recognizes them right away. And he starts grilling them, basically. And it says he spoke roughly to them. And he starts accusing them of being spies.
And so, upon first glance, you might think, oh, Joseph is giving them a little what for?
Yeah, it's like taste their own medicine.
Little vengeance. Is this retribution? What is Joseph's spirit in this? But if you look closer, chapter 42, it ends with, so Joseph pushes on them so much, and the word honest is repeated 7 times in that chapter. There's a cluster of honest. And Joseph, it says, he wants to see if they are honest men. The brothers begin it saying, we are honest men.
We're honest people.
We are 12 brothers from our father in Canaan, and although one of them is no more, we are honest men. And Joseph tests them so that their words may be verified, it says. He says that your words may be tested, whether there is any truth in you. And so Joseph's repeated accusations that they're spies and not trusting them is this whole kind of drama just to see if they have any contrition in them, to see if there's been any heart change, if they actually are honest.
Right, because they're still presenting themselves as honest. They're not disclosing to anybody what actually happened with Joseph. And
they still haven't owned it to Jacob.
No.
Their father.
They don't have any reason to own it before Joseph at this point because they don't know who he is. But he knows them, and he knows that they're not they're not being honest. That's all there is to it. And so he pushes on them, and he pushes them to the point where he grills them to where they share about their other brother, Benjamin. And so that becomes the test. And he says, all right, if you've got another brother, I'm saying you're spies, and you guys are saying you're not. And he's like, if you have another brother, then bring that brother. And then I'll believe you.
Yes.
And so go get him. And which is, again, setting things up for more drama between them all. But and this dismays the brothers, and they actually do then acknowledge
their guilt.
Their guilt.
They confess the guilt that they have been carrying for
to each other
20 years.
Right, and they don't think Joseph can understand them because they're speaking in Hebrew, and there was this interpreter there, but Joseph hears what they're saying and knows what they're saying, and they say to each other in verses 21 and following, in truth, we are guilty concerning our brother, and that we saw the distress of his soul. When he begged us, and we did not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us. And Reuben answered them, didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy, but you didn't listen, so now there comes a reckoning for his blood. It says that they didn't know that Joseph understood them, but he turned away from them and wept. And then he returned to them, and that's when he says, I'm going to take one of you while you go off and get your younger brother. I'm going to take Simeon, and he's going to stay here in jail. And the rest of you go back and get your younger brother and bring him to me, and then your brother will be free. And
and he'll see, because Benjamin is the only other son of Rachel, he'll see how these brothers care about their father now, and how these brothers care about, the other brother that's closest to Joseph.
Right.
So he'll really be able to see their hearts. And again, this is a picture of reconciliation horizontally. If you, God is the one having mercy on Joseph, giving them the grace to forgive, giving him the grace to forgive his brothers, and also having mercy on Joseph's brothers. But so the reconciliation between us and God is a separate thing than us and other people. We need that mercy from God first in order to give that forgiveness and to have a real repair in a relationship between each other. And so that is a blessing when it happens. You want that so much, that the mercy that we have received from God bears fruit in reconciliation between each other. Right. And I mean, that's all the epistles. Right. All the New Testament is letters describing what it would be like to be reconciled first to God through Jesus, and then have that flow in fruit with one another. And we're always needing that mercy of God to help us to do that. And here's a story of a very big tear, and it can and does happen. And we see the Lord bringing reconciliation horizontally between brothers and a father here.
That's right. Yeah, and you may have heard, it's possible that you've heard about this story before, and if anybody's ever said that this is somehow the way it works with us and God too, that he waits to see if we're genuinely sorry, or if we have this, genuine kind of repentance, like Joseph is testing them before he gives forgiveness. That is not the way it works with the Lord, which is very clear in the New Testament. I mean, Paul says, and in the Old Testament, very clear. But Paul says that, while we were still his enemies, Christ died for us, while we were ungodly, while we were evil, all these things in Romans 5 and other places in his letters, he makes it very clear that it was not about our turning to God or our effort towards him or our being really sorry that instigated the forgiveness. It's that God sent his son when nobody was looking for him. God is the one who instigates forgiveness with us.
He gifts repentance.
Yeah. He gives it to us, and that's what Kate's saying. And then out of that births actual sorrow and contrition, and then a desire to reconcile and a desire to repent. It comes out of his kindness, That's
And
what.
we really see that in this story. God is sending the famine. God is pushing on their buttons.
Yeah.
They still have a festering wound where Joseph was in these brothers' hearts. And so he pushes on that by making Benjamin now come and have to walk through grief again in the same way with Jacob, their father. So he's pushing on these brothers in order to bring out their confession.
Yeah.
And it's cleansing for them.
It is. And I think it's important to say, building on what you said a moment ago, that when you're dealing with broken relationship, horizontally, that we can, by God's grace, forgive people, unrepentant people.
Mm-hmm.
We can offer forgiveness for sure. That is God's grace and mercy that allows us to do that, as he's done to us. And but when it comes to actually having the relationship rebuilt, or a future for the relationship, then there's the work of reconciliation and rebuilding trust, and kind of seeing if the person is genuinely wanting to own their stuff, because it would be unsafe, depending on what the breach is in a relationship. It could be unsafe to just be like, oh, don't worry about it, I'm just jumping right back into the thing, like if it's an abusive relationship, then that would not be a wise thing. It doesn't mean you can't forgive the person, but it does mean that there should be some boundaries and some healthy ways, like kind of mile markers, essentially, to achieve reconciliation, so that trust can be rebuilt. And so it's important just to make that distinction a little bit, I think. When the Lord forgives, he is God and good, and he absorbs everything. Like that's why he is actually special.
Yes,
and
he is the savior of the world. We are not.
That's why we're not just he's not just an example for us and all of that. Like we can't leave Jesus in that place. He is the one true saving God, and he absorbs all of our sin, and takes it because he can, and we can't. And thank God he does. But anyway, I just wanted to make that distinction.
That's good.
A bit.
And that's why we love to describe marriage as the ministry of reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
It's because you've got two people who are really invested in wanting to be at peace with each other and wanting to be one with each other.
Right.
And so when sin does come up, which it will, we have the reassurance that there is a God of reconciliation, just like in this story. I hope that through all of our podcasts, your vision of how active God grows, that you see, oh my gosh, he's so big, and he is always intervening, always acting upon me in order to bring forgiveness, freedom, a repair, greater, joy with each other. And so that is what we really hope, that you see his bigness and his goodness. And so you have that hope that God is doing that in marriages, pushing his finger, just like he's doing on these older brothers, to bring about a confession of sin in order to have a much better repair and forgiveness with each other, and getting closer afterwards. So
yes.
So this between brothers can also apply to marriage, but we see the brothers make this real honest confession, and Joseph weeps. And because of his weeping too, that he's not just messing with them. His heart is involved here, and he is trying to see if he can trust them again.
Mm-hmm.
And so he gets them to have to bring Benjamin, and he keeps Simeon, the second oldest, as guarantee that they would return with Benjamin. And of course, Jacob, when they go home, and then Joseph gives their money back to them as
right
on their way home.
Each one of their sacks has their money put back into it, which scares the heck out of him.
Yeah. So. And he's just doing that as a freebie. So, like Joseph is not interested at all in like their money. He doesn't need their money.
Mm-hmm.
This is all about the repair in the relationship and his desire to reconcile with them. And so he gives them this huge, all of their grain, returns their money to them. That scares them. And they go home and explain to Jacob what has happened, and that the ruler, this Egyptian ruler, was accusing us of being spies, and he's kept Simeon and he grilled us closely about our father and about our youngest brother. And he said that he wouldn't trust us or do trade with us unless we brought our youngest brother back with us next time. Mm-hmm. And he won't release Simeon to us until we bring our youngest brother back. And Jacob is furious about this, and all of his grief that is unhealed, it like rips it open again. And you see that. And then you see Reuben, the oldest, offer to him. And this is at the end of chapter 42. He says, I will promise that I will take care of Benjamin and trust him into my care, and I will promise that I will take care of him. And Jacob does not trust Reuben and says, no, the boy will remain here. And so they have to wait, and we go into chapter 43, and they wait until they're running out of food again. And so now Jacob is faced with either Benjamin dies of starvation, or he risks losing Benjamin in the hands of his either neglectful 10 other sons, or because this Egyptian ruler is crazy and is going to kill Benjamin too. So he's like, and he comes to a place of acceptance and letting go. And he says, if I am bereaved of Benjamin, I am bereaved. But his back is against a wall now. He's either going to die of famine under my nose, or I'm going to risk this wager and send Benjamin. And you see this beautiful picture of Judah reapproaching Jacob at this moment where they're about to starve again from famine. And Judah offers his life as a pledge to protect Benjamin. And this time, Jacob accepts it. And I can't help but think that some of the repentance and that Judah exhibited when he was messing around with his daughter-in-law, Tamar, a few chapters ago, he is a brother who actually has owned his sin, when exposed to him, and made amends for it. He kept taking care of Tamar, and she ends up being this great ancestor of Jesus. And so of all the brothers, Jacob trusts him the most because there's been some forgiveness there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, I mean, we're almost out of time, but Jacob is very clear, at the end of 42, where he says, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he's the only one left. And if harm should happen to him, then you're going to make me basically die in sorrow. And, but yeah, they leave the matter until they run out of grain, which poor Simeon is sitting in jail back in Egypt. It's like, that's a long time probably that they ran through all that grain. But now they're ready to go again. And Jacob's kind of, as you say, between a rock and a hard place. And it continues to show Jacob's favoritism, that he really loves Benjamin and Joseph the most. He misses Joseph so much. And these poor older brothers, they obviously behaved very, very badly. And yet they still get...
but you see why.
You still get the shaft from their dad, yeah. And he's like, well, I mean, Simeon himself, the poor guy, is just this literally just a victim in this part of the story. We're just sitting in prison and nobody cares. Yeah. I'm sure Joseph was taking good care of him though, but still. Anyway, but yeah, you're right. Judah's walk through his own horrible sin with his daughter-in-law definitely seems to have won him some trust from Jacob. And at the very least, his word carries a different kind of weight to it than Reuben's does at this point for Jacob. And so he does let them go. And there's going to be more drama, as we will see when we come back. We'll see how Joseph handles them now that he sees Benjamin with him. But It is just an ongoing, wonderful family drama. It's better than like Days of Our Lives. And
the dynasty of the ancient
that's right.
Middle East.
That's right. This is it. And so we hope that in this episode you have heard some good news, that there is a God who loves you and he doesn't actually leave you where you are, that he comes after you and saves you from your brokenness and from your inability to love. He's done that for all of us in his son, Jesus. And he absorbs all the things that we're capable of and all the things we actually have done and thought and felt against others and against ourselves and against him. And he forgives us and loves us.
That's right.
And that you are free in that he actually sets you free and doesn't hold any of that against you. It is done and says it's his and you can't have it back. So I hope that you have a blessed day thinking of that as you go through your day.
He is lifting your burden of guilt.
That's right.
And is helping you walk through the next right thing to do to make amends.
And so we will see you next time. You, as always, can check out what we do at dandelionministries.org, which is in the show notes. You can also support the show in the show notes. And you can also send us some questions. If you have questions for us about marriage or relationships that you'd like us to tackle on air, we would love to do that. And you can shoot us those questions. I think we've just been doing such a good job of answering everybody's questions that they haven't been coming in lately. So, but we'll see if we can scrounge some more up so we can answer some of your questions. And we hope you have a wonderful day.
Thanks for listening. Have a great day.